She was forced to stand in the snow all night. By morning, he'd built her a shelter around her. The wind screamed through the skeletal pines like a chorus of ghosts, each gust lashing Clara Hawks's exposed face with icy needles. Her hands, swollen and raw, clutched at the tattered edges of her woolen shawl, but it did little against the relentless cold. Snow packed against her boots, sealing them in place as if the earth itself conspired to root her there. She hadn't planned to be caught in the storm. At dawn the skies were calm, the air crisp but still. She left the cabin out of desperation, walking 4 miles through the thickets in search of a neighbor who might share bread or medicine. The baby hadn't stirred in 2 days. Her hands trembled as she remembered the silence in her womb too. Quiet, too still. Now night had fallen, and the snow was rising. She blinked hard. Frost clung to her lashes like white thorns. Somewhere to the west, a wolf howled long, low, and mournful. It echoed through the valley like a funeral bell. She knew this part of Montana was wilderness, not yet claimed by roads or fences. There were no lights in the distance, no paths to follow back. Only white. Clara drew a shaky breath, but the cold made it hurt. She wrapped both arms over her middle, guarding the quiet weight of her unborn child, and forced 1 foot forward, then another. But the darkness tricked her senses, and her vision rippled like fabric caught in wind. Was she walking in circles? The world narrowed to breath and pain. Each inhale a razor, each step a gamble. If she stopped, she would die. But even that seemed preferable to what came next. What if the baby never cried? What if she gave birth? Here, beneath the trees, and no one heard? Then she remembered John. Her husband's face rose in memory's strong jaw, dirt-streaked hands, voice like worn leather. He'd promised they'd make a life here, in the new territories, away from the war and hunger. He built their cabin log by log. He buried their firstborn with his own hands when fever took her. And when he was taken by the blight last fall, Clara didn't scream. She stood beside the shallow grave and told herself she'd keep going. For both of them. But this storm, it wasn't just weather. It was punishment. Or maybe test. The trees around her grew thicker, branches clawing down like gnarled fingers. She stumbled again, this time catching her shin on a rock hidden beneath the snow. She fell hard, hands bracing instinctively, and when she tried to stand, a dizzy wave knocked her back. She didn't rise not at first dot above her. Snowflakes twirled like ash from a fire. Her fingers dug into the frozen crust. Somewhere inside her coat, the locket warmed faintly against her skin. John's locket. Inside, a sketch of him and their baby, done in graphite before the fever took her. That drawing those fragile lines was all she had left of her family. And now she was going to die here, alone. She rolled to her knees. Her breath came in short gasps. Somewhere, something cracked like a branch breaking under weight. She froze. Then she saw him, a figure, motionless beneath the trees, wrapped in furs, shadowed face, watching her. Her heart pounded. She squinted, but couldn't make out his eyes. Just the outline, a man tall and broad, like a bear upright. Not moving. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. A rasp. "Help," she whispered, though it sounded more like breath than word. He stepped forward. She flinched, scrambling backward through the snow, her legs tangled in the hem of her coat. He stopped, raised one gloved hand. Slowly. He wasn't. Armed Dot, or at least, not obviously Dot, her vision tilted again. The cold was winning. She leaned forward, coughed, and something warm spilled into her mouth. Blood. She felt herself slip sideways, and then he was beside her. She didn't see him move. 1 second, distant. The next, near. His arms wrapped around her, firm but careful. She felt herself lift her head pressed against something warm. Fur, smelled like pine. Smoke and earth. She fought to stay conscious. She wanted to ask his name, to ask if he was real. But everything faded. When she opened her eyes, she was inside something, a shelter. Rough, crude, but real. Branches bent overhead, interwoven like ribs of some giant beast. Snow packed between them, furs along the floor. In the center, a flickering flame from an ember nestled in a shallow bowl of clay and stone. Smoke curled toward a small vent near the top. She blinked slowly. Her limbs ached, but she could move. Them. She wasn't dead. He was sitting across from her. Same fur cloak. Same silent WATCHFULNESS. The firelight revealed his face. High cheekbones, wind-burned skin, long dark hair tied with leather. Eyes deep brown, not cold, but unreadable. A jagged scar ran from his left eyebrow down to the cheek. Not fresh. She whispered. Thank you. He said nothing. His hand moved toward a pouch at his waist. Slowly, he pulled out a small strip of something dried meat and offered it. Her stomach rebelled at first, then remembered hunger. She took it. He nodded. Once. They sat in silence for a while. The wind outside beat against the dome, but the shelter held. Inside was stillness, warmth, life. She wanted to ask his name, but didn't. The silence wasn't hostile. It was something else. Sacred, maybe. Or heavy with things unspoken. He glanced at her belly. She tensed, instinctively protective. But his gaze wasn't invasive. It was thoughtful. He pulled out a flask of something water and passed it to her. She drank carefully. Then, reaching into the lining of his cloak, he withdrew a small wooden talisman. A bird carved from birchwood, feathers etched with care. He placed it by her side, near the fire. For protection? She wasn't sure. She didn't sleep that night, but she didn't freeze either. The next morning, light filtered through a gap in the dome. The storm had passed. Everything was white outside, silent, still. He stood first, packed the fires, remains into a pouch, rolled up the furs, motioning for her to sit. He handed her a flat cake of bread and gestured at her feet. She nodded. They wouldn't stay here. As she followed him out into the world of snow, Clara felt something shift. Not safety, not yet, but a threat of it. A beginning. He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. Each step through the snow was heavy. But they walked together. She didn't know his name. Not yet, but he'd built her a shelter around her. Without word, without debt. And in this world, this brutal, frozen world, it was everything. They crossed a frozen stream. He tested the ice before letting her step. She saw where animal tracks veered off, and how he followed their pattern with his eyes, cataloging danger. He was more than a man of the forest. He belonged to it, moved with it, and she was learning to follow. They came to a grove of pines where the wind couldn't reach. He paused, bent low, and began clearing snow. Underneath was a small catch of supplies: jerky, hides, a fire starter stone, a handmade knife. He'd hidden this stash well. A survivor's cache. He handed her a piece of flint. She turned it over in her hand. It was smooth from use. She looked up. He was watching her again. Her lips trembled. You didn't have to save me." His eyes didn't waver. He touched his own chest, then pointed to the carved bird she still carried. A promise. She realized he had lost something too. Clara didn't press. Not then. But when night came again, and the snow began to fall once more, he stopped near a ring of stones and began building a new shelter. She knelt to help without being asked. Together, they bent branches. Together, they built walls. The cold pressed down on them. but they moved with purpose. By nightfall, a fire crackled again. The silence between them remained, but it had changed shape. No longer distance. Now, understanding. Before sleep took her, she whispered, "My name is Clara." The fire popped. She thought he wouldn't answer, but then, low and steady, a single word, Tahu. It felt like a seed planted in snow, fragile, quiet, but alive. And Clara, for the first time in days, felt herself begin to thaw. Tomorrow would bring dangers, but tonight there was shelter. And that was enough. The second night was colder, not in temperature, but in quiet. The snow had ceased, and the wind hushed, but the stillness rang louder than any storm. Clara sat close to the fire Tahu had built, watching him through the orange glow as he shaved. A sliver of bark with the edge of his bone-handled knife. His hands were precise, deliberate, moving with the rhythm of someone who did not waste time or effort. She offered him half of the pine, tea she'd brewed with what he'd gathered earlier. That day, he accepted with a nod, drank, then returned to his work. They hadn't spoken since that night when he'd told her his name. She didn't press. He didn't need questions. She was beginning to understand that silence, for Tahu, was its own language. When he looked at her, he did not glance away quickly like many men had done. His gaze was still, like lake water at dawn, reflective, deep, and it unsettled her less with each hour. During the day, he taught her without words. A tilt of his head told her to duck beneath the branches. A quiet click of his tongue warned her of brittle ice. She watched how he moved in the snow, how his feet pressed gently without sinking, how his breathing slowed before each step. He was more animal than man in these woods. No, not animal. More part of it. She, on the other hand, was painfully aware of every twig she snapped, every exhale that steamed visibly from her lips. She was learning, but slowly. And learning hurt, that her muscles ached from the cold. Her stomach remained half empty. Despite the small meals he shared, they ate dried elk and a kind of fibrous root she couldn't name. No salt, no comfort, only sustenance. Still, it was more than she'd had in weeks. On the third morning, Tahu led her to a high ridge. Below, the valley spread like a blanket of crushed bone white, unending and too quiet. Then she saw them. Tracks. Not deer. Not wolf. Horses. And men. Clara stiffened, her breath catching. Tahu crouched beside her, examining the pattern in the snow. His brow furrowed. Without looking, he motioned for her to stay low. She obeyed. The prints were fresh. 4 riders, at least. They'd passed through no more than an hour ago, headed south. The trail curved near the edge of the creek she and Tahu had crossed yesterday. If they'd been there sooner, they would have been seen. "Who are they?" she whispered, not expecting an answer. Tahu didn't respond. Instead, he stood, eyes scanning. The trees. She followed him down the ridge and back into the cover of firs. There was an urgency to his stride. Now, not panicked, but measured, like a wolf that smells fire on the wind. That night, Tahu built no fire. Instead, they huddled beneath the thickest part of the pine canopy, wrapped in hides. The cold bit at their fingers, but he would not risk smoke. Clara did not argue. She'd seen the sharp edge in his jawline, the sudden calculation in his silence. She knew danger when it walked near. Later, as she tried to sleep, Clara heard movement quiet. Too quiet for wind. A distant crack, not a branch falling. A boot step. She sat up. Tahu's eyes opened immediately. He'd been awake, listening. He pressed a finger to his lips, then reached into the bundle at his side, drawing out his bow. Then, without a word, he vanished into the darkness. Clara stayed still, heart hammering. Minutes passed. Then she saw them 3 silhouettes moving between trees. Voices hushed, speaking with the rough cadence of men who feared neither weather nor law. "Ain't no one out here but frostbit ghosts," one man muttered. "Shut up," another hissed. "Keep looking. Boss says she went this way." "Pregnant woman," said the note, easy to spot. Her blood turned to ice. They were looking for her. Why? She couldn't think. Only feel the breath locked in her throat. A scream clawed its way up, but never reached. Her mouth. An arrow whistled through the trees. Then silence. One of the men dropped without sound. The other 2 shouted. Spinning. Tahu moved like lightning through the dark, his bow replaced by a knife that caught the firelight as it drove through the second man's side. The third fired a wild shot, missed, then ran. Tahu didn't follow. He waited, listened. Only when the night returned to quiet did he lower his weapon. Clara stared, numb. Tahu returned to her, blood on his hands but not his face. He didn't speak. She wanted to ask why they were chasing her. She didn't. She didn't want to know the answer yet. They buried the bodies in the snow. It took hours, working in silence. By morning, she couldn't feel her fingers. He wrapped her, hands in bark and cloth, binding them gently. She didn't resist. He gave her half of his water. She drank without complaint. On the 6th day, they found a creek not yet frozen. Tahu knelt beside it, cupped water in his palms, and washed his face. Clara did the same, watching how the grime and sweat made the icy stream shimmer like silver as it slipped from her skin. She looked at her reflection in the water. Hollow eyes, cheeks sunken, lips cracked. She didn't recognize the woman she saw. Tahu watched her quietly. "Did they know me?" she asked him finally, as they sat beside a hollow log. He hesitated, then nodded. Her mind raced. She hadn't owed anyone anything. No debts, no family to anger. The only connection she could think of was John. Her husband had served in the Ulster. War, yes, but he'd left all that behind, hadn't he? What do they want? He shrugged, but it wasn't indifference. It was knowledge tempered by the understanding that want, in this world, was often cruel. She leaned against the log, her breath rising in small white clouds. "If they come again, will we run?" she asked. He shook his head once, then met her eyes. No. It was the first English word he'd spoken since his name. She believed him. That night, they returned to the first shelter. It had held well, snow-covered but intact. Tahu showed her how to reinforce the roof, how to find dry wood. Beneath snow, they worked together without speaking, muscles in rhythm. When she slipped with the hatchet and sliced her palm, he was beside her instantly, binding it with strips of moss and deer hide. His hands were steady, careful, never overreaching. As he wrapped the wound, she studied his face. The lines there were older than his years, etched by weather and loss. That scar beneath his eye told a story she'd never hear. But she didn't need to. She trusted him. When the fire was lit again, Clara pulled out the locket from her coat. She opened it, held it out. "My husband, John, he died last fall." Tahu took the locket in his fingers. He studied it for a long time. She continued, her voice low. "He built our cabin by the river. Said he wanted our children to grow up with roots. We had a daughter once, Emma. Fever took her. Then him. I thought I'd die next." Tahu looked at her, expression unreadable. "But then you found me." He nodded once. Then he reached into his own cloak and removed something wrapped in deer skin. He unfolded it carefully. Drawing charcoal on hide. A woman and a boy, both dark-haired, both unsmiling. The style was rough, but the love in it was unmistakable. Clara understood instantly. She touched the hide gently. "I'm sorry," she said. Thu did not reply. He did not have to. That night, she dreamed of fire roaring in tall and of a scream, carried on wind. When she woke, the fire in their shelter had gone out. Tahu was gone. She sat up, panicked, then saw him outside, crouched in the snow. He was watching the trees. She joined him? Tracks again? She asked. He nodded. 2 men. Approaching. He handed her a short bow. Smaller than his lighter. She'd never fired one before, but she took it. He showed her how to hold it, how to draw. They would not run, not this time, as dawn broke, the forest filled with birdsong. But beneath it, Clara felt the tension rise. A string pulled taut across a bough. She had not planned to become a fighter. She had only wanted to survive. But the line between the two was vanishing. Survival here meant defending fighting, not only for herself, but for the child inside her. Tahu glanced at her one last time. Before they stepped into the trees, no words, just trust. And in that moment, Clara knew she would not break. The storm might come again. The men might return. But she had learned how to stand not alone with him. And that was enough for now. Snow fell in a slow, steady hush, blanketing the forest in the illusion of peace. Beneath the trees, however, the silence bristled with tension. Clara crouched behind a low cluster of fir, bow gripped tightly in her hands, breath shallow and fast. Just ahead, through a break in the trees, smoke twisted into the sky, thin, gray, curling upward like the last breath of a dying fire. Tahu knelt beside her, his hand pressed flat against the ground. He didn't speak. He hadn't since they tracked the boot prints 2 hours ago. The snow made their approach difficult, but it also muffled their steps. Clara had learned to appreciate that. The forest could be either ally or traitor, depending on how one moved through it. She shifted her weight slightly, and a twig cracked beneath her boot. Tahu turned to her sharply, but not in anger. His gaze held a warning and something else, fear. Not for himself. For her. The smoke came from a small camp nestled in the ravine below. 4 tents, 1 fire, a horse tethered to a pine. From their vantage, they could see only fragments of movement. But Tahu had already counted 3 men, likely more inside the tents. The same men who'd hunted them before. The same men who'd spoken of a bounty on her head. Clara didn't understand why. Not fully, but that question had become irrelevant. These men were danger incarnate, merciless, determined, and close. Too close. Tahu motioned with 2 fingers flank left. She nodded, heart pounding. They moved as shadows, slipping through. Trees circling the camp. Snow fell on her shoulders and didn't melt. Her fingers were numb, but she kept her grip firm. She couldn't afford hesitation. Not now. From the other side of the camp, a shout erupted. They'd been seen. Tahu broke from cover first. Arrow knocked and loosed in a blink. It struck one man clean in the chest. He dropped without a cry. Clara's breath caught. Another man dove behind a log, rifle raised. The sound of the shot cracked the quiet wide open. Clara rolled behind a boulder, snow exploding around her as bullets tore into the tree beside her. Splinters flew. She flattened, trying to remember everything Tahu had taught her. Stay low. Move fast. Don't hesitate. Tahu moved with deadly efficiency, emerging from behind a tree to fire again, then disappearing before return fire could find him. Clara saw the 3rd man rise from behind the tents and raise a pistol in Tahu's direction. She didn't think. She stepped out, drew the bowstring as tight as she could manage, and let the arrow fly. It missed, but just barely. The man turned toward her, startled, and that hesitation was enough. Tahu's arrow struck him in the throat. He fell backward without a sound. Then came the 4th man. He was larger, broader, and faster than the others. He didn't fire from a distance. He came barreling through the trees like a bull, teeth bared beneath a scraggly beard. Clara barely had time to react before he tackled her into the snow. The world became a blur of white and pain. She hit the ground hard, the bow knocked from her grasp. The man was on top of her, hands around her throat, squeezing. His eyes were bloodshot, furious. Clara clawed at him, nails scraping against leather. Her vision darkened. Suddenly, the weight lifted. Ju had come. He tore the man off her with a grunt, slamming him into the snow. They fought brutally, no finesse, just fists and fury. The man punched Tahu hard across the jaw, then reached for a knife at his belt. Clara crawled toward her bow, found an arrow, knocked it with shaking hands. Thu, and the man wrestled, breath steaming in the cold. The knife gleamed. She loosed the arrow. Struck the man in the side. He roared, stumbled, and Tahu drove his own blade deep into the attacker's chest. The man jerked once, then stilled. The fight was over. For a moment, there was only silence. The wind returned, whispering through the trees like it had been waiting for its cue. Clara's hands shook violently as she lowered the bow. Her lungs burned. She'd killed a man. Or at least helped to. The weight of it settled into her bones. Not heavy with guilt, but not light, either. He knelt beside her, checked her throat where the bruises were already blooming purple. She tried to speak. Her voice came out a rasp. "I'm fine." He looked at her, eyes filled with something she hadn't seen before. Pride. That night, they returned to the shelter. Neither spoke during the walk. There was no need. The wind carried their thoughts for them. Inside, the fire was kind. Clara sat close, hands cupped around a steaming bowl of broth they'd salvaged from the raided camp. Her throat still ached, but she could swallow. Tahu cleaned his wounds in silence. His left eye was swelling shut, but he didn't complain. Eventually, she found her voice. "They were hunting me, but not just for sport. There was something more." He nodded slowly. Then finally he spoke. "Gold, land. Some men believe a widow alone is opportunity." She looked down, bile rising. Rage simmered in her gut, not just for herself, but for every woman hunted like an animal, because someone believed her vulnerable. "They were wrong," she said. Tahu smiled faintly. "Yes." For a while, the fire cracked and hissed as if echoing the final moments of the fight. Clara's gaze drifted to the pendant Tahu always wore. Simple wood, carved into a bird mid-flight. She touched her locket, still warm against her skin. "You lost someone," she said quietly. "A family?" He nodded once. "My son," he said. 7 winters old?" She looked into his eyes and saw not just pain, but the vast chasm beyond it. The years lived without that child. The quiet every night. The fire never warm enough. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. In their silence, they shared grief. Equal and ancient. The next day, the snow thawed enough for travel. The sun peeked through the gray veil, casting light across the forest in soft golds and blues. Clara stood outside the shelter, breathing in the cold morning air. It hurt, but less than before. She felt stronger, changed, not by force, but by fire. Tahu approached, pack slung over his shoulder. He looked at her with the same calm strength he'd always had. But there was something behind it now. A softness, a sadness. "There is a settlement. A day's walk east," he said. "You will be safe there." Clara didn't answer right away. Her hands rested over her belly. She could feel the flutter, now the smallest movement. Life undeniable. "You're not coming with me," she said. Not a question. He shook his head. "Your people won't welcome mine." She looked away. It was true. Tahu could guide her through a snowstorm, fight off armed men, and save her life 3 times over, but in the eyes of the settlement, he would always be other. "Then I won't go," she said quietly, but he stepped forward and took her hand gently. "You must." She held his gaze, feeling everything she hadn't said. "There's a part of me," she whispered, "that never would have survived without you." His hand rose to her cheek. He brushed his fingers there, warm despite the cold. "You saved yourself," he said. "I only reminded you how." They walked together for most of the morning, moving east beneath trees dappled in sunlight. She held his hand tightly, unwilling to let go yet. He carried the bird pendant in his palm, sometimes looking at it as though it whispered to him. When the roofs of the settlement finally came into view, distant and faint through the thinning forest, they both stopped. He looked toward it, then back to her. Clara swallowed. "I want you to come. They don't know you, but I do." He smiled again, gently. "I belong to the forest, to wind and shadow. That is my way." She didn't argue. She understood. Some paths had to remain wild. He handed her a pouch of dried meat and roots, then reached into his cloak and pulled out the hide drawing of his family. He folded it carefully and gave it to her. "Why?" she asked, voice cracking. "So you remember," he said, "that we carry those we've lost, not as chains, but as lanterns." She couldn't stop the tears. They fell fast, hot against the cold. She stepped forward and hugged him tight, desperate, afraid she'd forget his warmth the second she let go. He held her. When she pulled away, he pressed the wooden bird into her hand. "For your child?" he said. Then, with no further words, he turned and walked into the trees. He didn't look back. Clara stood watching until he was gone. Then, slowly, she turned toward the village and began to walk. The snow crunched beneath her boots, but she did not falter. At the edge of the woods, she paused. The wind carried scents of wood smoke and bread. Life waited ahead, but not the same life she'd known. She reached into her coat, touched the locket, then the bird carving in her other hand. She was not the same woman who had wandered into the storm. She had stood in snow alone, ready to die, but he had built a shelter around her, not just of branches and fur, but of quiet strength, of protection without possession, of trust forged in fire, and now she carried all of that forward. When the first settlers spotted her, they called out, surprised. She waved once, and kept walking, one hand resting on the quiet, stirring life inside her. She would tell the child stories about survival, about snow, about silence and strength. And about a man made of wind and winter, who saved her without needing to be remembered. But she would remember. Always.